The architect, known only in whispers, and his ruthless Lieutenant Kane ruled Liverpool's streets from the shadows, controlling crime, corruption, and fear that no one dared to challenge. What they don't want you to see is the dark web they built beneath the city, where loyalty is deadly, betrayal is instant, and power comes at the ultimate cost. Liverpool's streets had a rhythm that outsiders could easily admire. Tourists wandered along the waterfront, snapping pictures of the iconic waterfront buildings and the towering liverbirds. Cafes bustled with chatter, street performers entertained crowds, and trams rattled over cobblestone streets, blending history with everyday life. To anyone passing through, it seemed like a city full of culture, opportunity and charm. But beneath the vibrant surface, a darker world thrived, one most people would never suspect existed. It was a city divided between the visible, everyday life and a hidden network of crime that operated silently in plain sight. The invisible network didn't announce itself with flashing signs or loud confrontations. Its presence was felt in the quiet fear of residents who knew better than to ask questions. Shops with shuttered windows, abandoned warehouses along the docks, and quiet alleys whispered secrets to those who were willing to notice. Small crimes went unreported, missing persons were written off as runaways, and unexplained wealth appeared in the hands of those who had learned the art of discretion. Each incident, though seemingly isolated, was actually a link in a much larger chain controlled by forces that remained unseen and untouchable. In this world, power was measured not by wealth alone, but by control. Control over who lived and who vanished, over businesses, over the flow of illicit goods, and over the police investigations that never seemed to catch up. Ordinary people walked past it every day without realizing it. The criminals moved among them like shadows, invisible yet omnipresent. They had a way of hiding in plain sight, blending seamlessly into Liverpool's vibrant neighborhoods, attending football matches, dining at popular restaurants, and driving expensive cars that raised eyebrows but drew no official scrutiny. The underworld's presence was marked by subtle signals, a sudden closure of a shop, a new face in the neighborhood, or an unexplained spike in activity at certain docks late at night. Residents who tried to question these oddities were met with silence, warnings, or veiled threats. Even the local media only scratched the surface, reporting isolated events without connecting the dots. The deeper truth, the one that law enforcement feared to acknowledge publicly, was that Liverpool had become a city operating under dual realities, one visible and vibrant, and another hidden and dangerous. Despite the danger, some thrill-seekers were drawn to this hidden world, fascinated by stories of high-stakes deals, daring escapes, and power struggles that never reached the front pages. But few realized that every story had consequences, and every action within the underworld could ripple far beyond the criminals themselves. People disappeared without a trace, and entire neighborhoods learned to live with fear as a constant companion. Liverpool's dangerous underworld was not just a backdrop to the city's charm. It was a parallel reality, thriving quietly, teaching one harsh lesson. Appearances can be deceiving, and what you see is never the whole truth. By the time dawn broke over the city, the waterfront glistened with light, and life carried on as if nothing had happened. Yet, behind closed doors and along forgotten streets, the web of power, fear, and secrecy continued to tighten its grip, waiting for the next thread to pull and reveal a truth that most would rather ignore. No one knew exactly where he came from, and no one had ever seen his face. He was known only by a single, chilling nickname: the Architect. He was the man who built Liverpool's underworld from the shadows, shaping it with a precision that few could imagine. While most people lived ordinary lives, the Architect orchestrated complex operations that spanned the city, controlling everything from underground gambling rings to smuggling networks. His influence reached beyond the docks, into nightclubs, backstreets, and even the offices of those who were supposed to keep the city safe. To outsiders, Empire was invisible, but to those who lived and worked within it, his presence was felt everywhere. The Architect's rise was methodical and silent. He did not start with violence or terror. Instead, he began by exploiting small opportunities, identifying weak points in the city's existing networks. He recruited carefully, preferring people who were overlooked by others, former petty criminals, disenfranchised youth, and those who had nothing to lose. Loyalty was demanded, and failure was not tolerated. Over time, these small pieces formed the foundation of an intricate machine, a web of operations that could function smoothly, even when individual elements were removed or compromised. He was a master strategist, never seen but always knowing what was happening across the city. A shipment would arrive at the docks, and by the next day it would be in the hands of someone he trusted implicitly. A gambling ring would thrive without interference, quietly generating millions in cash. Those who tried to defy him disappeared quietly, leaving only rumors and fear in their wake. Ordinary residents unknowingly crossed paths with his men every day. A taxi driver, a shopkeeper, a bartender, all unknowingly acting as tiny cogs in the larger mechanism. Despite his anonymity, the architect's reputation alone kept the city's underworld in check. Rival gangs who tried to encroach on his territory often found themselves outmaneuvered rather than confronted directly. He preferred control through manipulation rather than brute force, understanding that fear and uncertainty were more effective tools than violence alone. But when necessary, his wrath could be swift and merciless, leaving a message without a single word being spoken. The true extent of his operations remained hidden even from the police. Investigators would chase leads, only to find empty wishes, false identities, and carefully constructed alibis. Every plan had a contingency, every move anticipated. Even his closest associates often didn't know the full scope of his empire, which made betrayal almost impossible, or at least deadly, when attempted. For the residents of Liverpool, life continued under a facade of normalcy. The architect moved in the shadows, and few could imagine the scope of his control. His empire touched everyone in subtle ways, from sudden disappearances to unexplained wealth appearing overnight. The city thrummed with life on the surface, but beneath it, the machinery of a criminal mastermind was running at full speed. The architect's influence was silent, invisible, and absolute, proving one thing above all. In Liverpool, the most dangerous power was not the one you could see, but the one you could never fully understand. In the dangerous world of Liverpool's underworld, trust was a fragile and fleeting commodity. The architect had built his empire on loyalty, but loyalty could never be taken for granted. Inside his circle, friendships forged over years could unravel in an instant. Old rivalries and hidden grudges simmered beneath the surface, waiting for the perfect moment to ignite. Betrayal was always possible, and it carried consequences that were swift and often irreversible. No one was truly untouchable, not even those closest to the man who controlled the city from the shadows. The web of loyalty and betrayal was complex. Childhood friends who had grown up together in the same rough neighborhoods became lieutenants, trusted with enormous responsibilities. Former enemies were recruited, their grudges temporarily set aside in exchange for power and protection. Even officials who were meant to uphold the law sometimes became silent partners, their complicity unnoticed by the public. Within this delicate ecosystem, a single misstep could trigger a chain reaction that affected everyone, from the lowest-ranking operative to the architect himself. One such misstep began with a stolen shipment. The city's underworld relied on careful planning and secrecy, but when a shipment of contraband disappeared without explanation, the delicate balance was shattered. Suspicion immediately spread through the ranks. Fingers were pointed, alliances were questioned, and paranoia grew. The architect, usually calm and calculating, sensed the storm brewing and began to maneuver behind the scenes, pulling strings to identify the culprit. Every move had to be precise. A wrong step could result in chaos or worse, someone's life. The theft triggered an internal conflict unlike anything the city had seen. Men who had once been inseparable turned on one another. Meetings that once involved quiet nods and subtle signals became tense confrontations, full of silent threats and unspoken warnings. The underworld was a house of cards, and the missing shipment threatened to collapse it entirely. The city outside remained oblivious to the storm brewing in its hidden corners, where lives were being ruined and allegiances tested. The repercussions of betrayal extended beyond just financial loss. Lives were taken as warnings, and others vanished without a trace. Even those who survived were forced to reconsider their loyalties, questioning whether any bond could truly be trusted. It was a system that rewarded cunning and punished error, teaching everyone involved that mistakes were not tolerated. The ripple effect of one act of betrayal could unsettle the entire balance of power, demonstrating that control in this hidden world was never absolute. Despite the chaos, the architect's empire endured. He had anticipated these tensions and designed the network to withstand internal upheaval. Yet the theft revealed a truth that even he could not ignore. In a world built on secrecy, betrayal was inevitable, and the consequences were deadly. For the city of Liverpool, it was a silent warning: behind the ordinary streets and everyday lives, a dangerous game of loyalty and deceit was always being played. Those who thought they were safe could be the next to fall, and no secret, however well guarded, could remain hidden forever. The city of Liverpool had begun to notice subtle changes, though most residents remained unaware of the forces at play. Strange patterns emerged: sudden spikes in violent incidents, mysterious disappearances, and shipments vanishing without explanation. At first, the police treated these as isolated events, small incidents that could be solved with routine investigations. But as the evidence accumulated, it became clear that something far more organized and dangerous was unfolding beneath the surface. This was not random crime, it was a war that had been quietly waged for years, fought in shadows that the public rarely saw. The police moved cautiously. Secret raids were planned at night, aiming to catch criminals off guard. But the city's underworld was always one step ahead. Informants vanished before their information could be verified. Safe houses were abandoned moments before officers arrived. Every time a lead was pursued, it seemed to evaporate into thin air, leaving investigators frustrated and powerless. The criminals had developed a system, an almost invisible structure that allowed them to operate freely while staying hidden. It was a war that played out not only on the streets, but in offices, warehouses, docks, and even council halls. The battle was silent but deadly, a constant tug of war over control and influence. While law enforcement struggled to catch up, the underworld grew bolder. Each narrowly avoided arrest, emboldened its leaders, teaching them that the system was flawed and that their power was nearly untouchable. They expanded their operations, moving illicit goods through hidden channels, bribing those who might oppose them, and eliminating anyone who posed a real threat. The city's ordinary residents remained oblivious, carrying on with their daily routines, unaware that beneath their feet, a war was unfolding, one that could touch their lives in ways they would never anticipate. The turning point in this hidden war often came in small, almost invisible ways. A rival gang might attempt to seize territory, only to vanish mysteriously overnight. A shipment intended for legitimate business might be rerouted, never to be seen again. Each incident sent a clear message to both criminals and law enforcement. The balance of power was delicate, and anyone who misstepped would pay a heavy price. The architect's network, in particular, was adept at using intimidation and cunning to maintain dominance, ensuring that even internal disputes did not destabilize the empire he had built. For the police, it was a frustrating game of chess, where the pieces moved on their own and the rules were constantly changing. Traditional strategies were often ineffective against an adversary who thought several steps ahead, anticipating every move and countering it before it could take effect. The city became a maze of secrets and false leads, where victories were temporary and setbacks could be catastrophic. Every day in Liverpool brought a new challenge: uncovering evidence without alerting the perpetrators, following trails that could vanish at any moment, and hoping that each action brought them closer to breaking the cycle of fear and control. Despite the difficulty, the authorities continued their pursuit. They knew that capturing a single figure would not end the underworld, but it could unravel the network piece by piece. The city, while seemingly calm, was on edge. The hidden war was real, relentless, and ongoing. A silent struggle that left residents unaware of the danger lurking behind familiar streets. In Liverpool, the fight between law and shadow had no clear end, and the balance of power could shift in an instant, reminding everyone that the city's safety was never guaranteed. Liverpool's historic docks had long been a symbol of commerce and trade, bustling with activity as ships unloaded goods from across the world. To the casual observer, it was a scene of ordinary labor, workers moving crates, cranes lifting containers, and trucks ferrying cargo to warehouses. But under the cover of night, the docks became a different world entirely, a place where the city's underworld thrived in plain sight. Hidden compartments within cargo ships carried contraband, from illegal drugs to stolen merchandise, and even weapons that could arm entire criminal networks. These shipments were orchestrated with meticulous precision, allowing criminals to move vast amounts of goods while avoiding the notice of law enforcement. The architect and his men controlled large sections of the docks like a private territory. They had insiders who knew the schedules of patrols, security shifts, and shipping manifests. Every shipment was accounted for, every handoff carefully planned. The docks were a maze of warehouses, containers, and secret passageways, and those who did not belong quickly learned that it was a dangerous place to trespass. Outsiders were warned away, and those who ignored the warnings sometimes disappeared quietly, leaving nothing but fear and unanswered questions behind. One shipment, in particular, would come to define the dock's shadowy reputation. A container worth millions, carrying goods that could have destabilized rival gangs, vanished without a trace one night. Investigators arrived to find empty crates and a trail that led nowhere. The operation had been so precise that it seemed almost impossible. No fingerprints, no surveillance footage, and no witnesses willing to talk. It was a masterclass in organization, demonstrating how deeply the underworld had infiltrated what should have been a controlled and monitored environment. The docks were no longer just a place of commerce, they were a proving ground for criminals, a testing ground for power, and a reminder that even the most secure systems could be outmaneuvered. The danger at the docks was not just about the goods themselves, but about the people involved. Dock workers, longshoremen, and even security personnel could be manipulated, bribed, or threatened into complicity. Every role in the operation, no matter how small, was critical to its success. Those who attempted to resist risked exposure, violence, or disappearance. The docks became a microcosm of the wider underworld, reflecting its hierarchies, its rules, and its brutal efficiency. It was a place where ordinary lives intersected with extraordinary criminal ambition, often with deadly consequences. Even the city's authorities were cautious. They understood that making a public show of intervention could backfire, alerting criminals and driving operations further underground. Covert surveillance became essential, and each move had to be carefully calculated. But the underworld's grip on the docks was not absolute. Rival gangs, law enforcement raids, and internal betrayals all created moments of vulnerability. These gaps, rare as they were, offered the only chance for disruption in a network designed to operate invisibly, relentlessly, and with ruthless precision. For Liverpool, the docks were more than a historical landmark. They were a gateway into the city's dangerous underworld. Every shipment that arrived, every shadow that moved along the warehouses at night, reminded the city that beneath its vibrant exterior existed a world governed by secrecy, fear, and control. The docks were a battlefield, a proving ground, and a symbol of the city's hidden dangers, and in that darkness, the true extent of the underworld's power could finally be glimpsed. In the hidden world of Liverpool's underworld, secrecy was the ultimate currency. Everyone knew that a single mistake could cost more than just money. It could cost lives. But even the most cautious operatives were not immune to doubt, fear, and conscience. One young insider, weary of constant surveillance, threats, and the unending cycle of violence, decided to take a risk that could change everything. They began leaking critical information, providing details about financial transactions, secret locations, and the identities of key lieutenants within the criminal network. This act was both courageous and perilous. A single misstep could mean immediate retribution. The information reached the authorities in fragments at first, hints of the empire that had operated invisibly for years, Safe houses were revealed, hidden bank accounts traced, and coded communications intercepted. Investigators began to piece together the puzzle, connecting the dots that had previously been impossible to link. For the first time, the scale of the operation became clear. It was not just a gang or a single criminal enterprise, but a sprawling network that extended across the city, controlling docks, clubs, and neighborhoods with precision and intimidation. But the leak did not go unnoticed. The architect and his inner circle were experts at detecting threats, and they quickly identified signs of betrayal. An internal investigation was launched, subtle but relentless, designed to root out the source before the authorities could act. The young insiders suddenly found themselves at the center of a dangerous game, hunted from all sides. Their every move was monitored, their communications scrutinized, and their safety compromised. The risk was immediate. If caught, the consequences would be fatal. The leak set off a chain reaction. Within the underworld, suspicion spread like wildfire. Lieutenants who had once trusted one another began to question every action, every conversation, and every connection. Paranoia became the new currency, and alliances shifted in unpredictable ways. Criminal operations that had run smoothly for years began to falter as fear infiltrated the ranks. It became clear that even the most carefully built empire could be vulnerable from within, and that a single act of courage or desperation could disrupt everything. Law enforcement now had a rare opportunity, but it was fleeting. The criminals' ability to anticipate, manipulate, and cover their tracks meant that every step forward was precarious. Investigators had to act quickly, analyzing the leaked information without alerting the perpetrators. Each discovery brought them closer to unraveling the network, yet the threat of exposure hung over every move. The city itself seemed to hold its breath, unaware that a silent race was underway, one that could either bring justice or allow the criminals to vanish further into the shadows. By the time authorities moved to act, the insiders' revelations had already shifted the balance of power. The architect's empire, while far from destroyed, was no longer untouchable. Fractures had begun to appear, alliances were strained, and the underworld that had once operated like a well-oiled machine now faced an unprecedented internal threat. The events of that period would leave a lasting imprint on Liverpool's criminal landscape, proving that even in a world governed by fear and secrecy, a single individual could alter the course of the game. The city, oblivious to the silent struggle, remained unaware that its hidden underworld was teetering on the brink of chaos. The underworld of Liverpool, carefully constructed over years, began to show cracks that even the architect could not fully contain. A scandal involving one of his closest allies sent shockwaves through the criminal network, exposing vulnerabilities that had long been hidden. This ally, once considered loyal and untouchable, was discovered to have been manipulating deals and withholding critical information. The revelation was like a spark in a powder keg, igniting rivalries that had simmered beneath the surface for years. The internal structure, once orderly and controlled, now teetered on the edge of chaos. As word of the betrayal spread, paranoia gripped the ranks. Lieutenants who had previously operated with confidence began to suspect one another, questioning every decision and every alliance. Meetings that had once been routine became tense confrontations, and whispered suspicions escalated into calculated acts of violence. The very system designed to maintain control began to unravel, leaving gaps that could be exploited by both rival criminals and law enforcement. It was a turning point, demonstrating that even the most powerful figures were vulnerable to internal collapse. The city's authorities recognized the opportunity immediately. They had long struggled to penetrate the underworld, but now the empire was showing signs of weakness. Investigators acted quickly, targeting safe houses, tracking financial transactions, and identifying key figures who could be arrested before they disappeared. The raids were calculated, surgical, and relentless, aimed at dismantling the network from within while minimizing the chance of tipping off remaining operatives. For the first time, law enforcement felt the possibility of a real victory, as the empire that had long seemed untouchable was now vulnerable to exposure and disruption. Despite the arrests and seizures, the underworld did not collapse entirely. The architect's influence had been deeply entrenched, and fragments of his operations continued to function independently. Some lieutenants who had survived the purge fled, taking parts of the network with them. These remnants maintained pockets of control, hinting that while the empire had been fractured, it was far from destroyed. Rival gangs and opportunists attempted to seize these territories, but without the same cohesion and organization, many of these efforts failed, leading to further violence and instability. For ordinary residents, life on the streets of Liverpool seemed to continue as normal, but the hidden consequences of the collapse were profound. Communities once dominated by fear and intimidation found temporary relief, yet the shadow of the underworld still lingered. The violence, betrayals and arrests had left a trail of uncertainty, warning that the struggle for control was not over. The underworld had been weakened, but the lessons learned during the collapse would shape its operations for years to come. The events of this period served as a stark reminder that power in the criminal world is never absolute. Even the most calculated and meticulously planned empires can crumble under the weight of betrayal, paranoia, and exposure. The city of Liverpool had glimpsed the fragility of what had seemed unassailable, and those who had survived the purge emerged changed, more cautious, more calculating, and ready to rebuild if the opportunity arose. The collapse proved one unshakable truth. In the underworld, nothing lasts forever, and the next surge of power can emerge from the shadows at any moment. Liverpool slowly returned to its familiar rhythm, the hustle of the waterfront and the chatter of cafes masking the turmoil that had unfolded behind the city's doors. The streets seemed calm, almost peaceful, and yet the scars of the underworld remained invisible to the casual observer. Those who had lived through the upheaval knew the truth. The city had glimpsed a dangerous world few could understand, and its effects would linger long after the headlines had faded. The architect, once the unseen ruler of shadows, had vanished, leaving behind an empire fractured but not entirely destroyed. The collapse of his network did not erase the lessons learned by those who remained. Lieutenants who had survived the purge had retreated into the shadows, watching, waiting, and recalculating their positions. They understood that power was transient, and that trust was a fragile commodity. Even the briefest lapse in vigilance could mean exposure or death. In the absence of the central figure, rival factions and ambitious newcomers began to test the boundaries of influence, attempting to claim territories abandoned during the purge. Yet the memory of past violence, betrayals and disappearances served as a chilling reminder that ambition came with immense risk. For ordinary residents, life resumed with a deceptive sense of normalcy. Children played in parks once shadowed by fear, markets buzzed with renewed energy, and local businesses reopened with cautious optimism. But in quiet corners and behind closed doors, people whispered about those who had vanished, those who had survived, and the invisible power that still lingered in the city's veins. Liverpool's underworld had not disappeared. It had simply transformed. It had learned to operate even more subtly, teaching a silent lesson that danger could thrive even where it seemed absent. Authorities, too, had emerged from the upheaval with a renewed understanding of the city's criminal networks. They had captured high-profile figures, disrupted operations, and revealed the hidden structures that had allowed the empire to flourish for years. Yet they knew that victory was never permanent. The shadows of the underworld were patient, resilient, and capable of resurfacing in unexpected ways. Surveillance, investigation, and vigilance became constant imperatives, a recognition that Liverpool's fight against hidden crime was far from over. The legacy of the architect and his empire was more than just the arrests, disappearances, and shattered alliances. It was a reminder that appearances could be deceiving, that the city's streets held stories untold, and that power often existed in the most invisible of forms. Ordinary life might appear safe, but the threads of fear, influence, and secrecy remained woven into the fabric of the city. Liverpool had learned that beneath the surface of everyday life, there existed a world operating by rules few understood, and whose consequences could touch anyone, anywhere. In the end, the city continued, moving forward while shadows lingered at the edges. The story of betrayal, cunning, and control became part of its hidden history, a cautionary tale for those who dared to look too closely. What was seen on the surface was only a fraction of the truth. The secrets of Liverpool's dangerous underworld, the strategies of the architect, and the silent battles fought in alleys, docks, and hidden safe houses remained. A chilling reminder that the city's shadows could never truly be eliminated. Life went on, but the invisible presence of the past hung quietly, waiting for the next opportunity to emerge from the darkness.